Good afternoon, everyone. I think everybody is now out of the waiting room. Uh, Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to share with you a progress update on this phase of work for the Northwest Corridor, and appreciate you all having been involved throughout the past year through our series of virtual meetings. So we are right now wrapping up phase one, preparing a summary report. We're going to share a little preview of the recommendations and what to expect when that report comes out very shortly, and then next steps for where we're going with the Northwest Corridor. And joined here by Gail Saunders, who will help us field questions as we go through the presentation. And I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. We may not even need the whole hour, and if not, we're happy to give you some time back. I know folks are very busy. And also Zach Sunderland at CODA, and also Sarah Kelly supporting with planning next as well. So as I mentioned, we are right now working with our consultant team, Kimberly Horn, and the broader team to prepare a final summary report for this phase one work that we've undertaken over the past year. So you'll be seeing that very soon, and we'll send out an email as soon as we've got that finalized and uploaded to the website for review. And we'll share a little bit of an overview of what to expect in that report. All of you have been engaged in our prior stakeholder meetings, public meetings. We did our public open house, virtual open house back in February and March. We've been continuing to get great engagement despite the COVID conditions. Actually gone out on the street a bit and been able to engage folks, and the East-West Corridor is really doing that very recently as well. And so we're looking forward to being able to engage people in person as we move forward. Continuing to hear strong support for improving transit in the corridor, for multimodal options in the corridor. Nearly 90% of survey respondents are expressing a desire for enhanced rapid transit in the Northwest Corridor. While we have heard interest in light rail, I think you all are aware through our prior round of engagement, our analysis has recommended bus rapid transit for the Northwest Corridor at this time, and that's what we're pursuing. But a lot of the feedback that we've heard is if it's BRT, then make sure it's true BRT or real BRT, really investing in the dedicated transit infrastructure, the dedicated lanes, the signal prioritization, all of those additional investments that make it truly competitive to the single occupant vehicle, providing that reliability and improved travel time for transit users. Also emphasis on those improved connections to surrounding neighborhoods and other destinations, to the trail system, between transit and other modes, and an emphasis on sustainable infrastructure, electrification of transit vehicles, obviously a climate benefit there, but also protection of the watershed and open space design with any right-of-way improvements. So through our last round of public engagement, a big piece of that, of course, was analyzing different alignment alternatives for BRT through the corridor. And we've broken the corridor up into two main sections. And again, this is the southernmost portion of an overall corridor that ultimately would go further northwest, presumed to terminate in Dublin. We've been focusing on a downtown to Bethel Road connection for this first phase of work. What we've heard is general support for the Olentangy River Road alignment, essentially the existing alignment of the roadway. It's the most direct. It would have the best travel time for transit through this section of the corridor. But a mixture of support for the variety of options that we've explored for the downtown connection from Goodale into downtown, connections that could go directly to the Arena District, options that would go directly to Broad Street in Franklinton, in any scenario, there would be an intersection of the east, west, and northwest corridors. It's just a matter of where that makes the most sense to happen. And so where we've arrived is proceeding with recommending alternative one, the Olentangy River Road alignment from Goodale to Bethel. This provides great opportunities to integrate with OSU's cab systems. I see we have Kim Moss, part of the project team here as well. That's in keeping with recommendations of OSU's transportation and parking plan, and providing those really enhanced east-west connections between a north-south BRT alignment and everything that's going on at West Campus and the new development there and main campus. And then opportunities as we proceed in a next design phase to really explore what happens at that north knot jog in Olentangy River Road underneath 315. And then in terms of the downtown connection, based largely on the feedback that we've heard and that mixture of desire to hit multiple destinations here, we've explored and are recommending pursuing a hybrid alignment of some of the alignments that we had originally looked at. And that resulted in what we're calling alignment 4. That is a hybrid of alignments 2 and 3. 2 was directly serving the Arena District. 3 would be making that connection down Souter Avenue to Franklinton, to West Broad Street. There's an opportunity to integrate this with more substantial long-term improvements for a more direct connection through this South Knot area, the interchange at 670 and 315 in Dublin Road. And also opportunities to continue to explore enhanced connections between the east-west and the northwest corridors along Souter Avenue. And what that looks like in full is this recommended alignment, again, Bethel Road, down through the South Knot area, Twin Rivers to Dublin Road, Spring and Long Streets into downtown. And then, of course, as we explore this, we're thinking about how this all fits together as part of this larger system, integrating with the east-west corridor as that unfolds, and that project's moving very quickly, led by Zach and Coda. And Zach's going to walk us through a little bit more of how we're thinking about these interconnections and how the east-west and the northwest along this recommended alignment can complement one another.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So like Justin said, we wanted to look at a holistic approach for the entire LinkUS network, future corridors, and the east-west corridor. Additionally, CODA's current network, which predominantly is still centered around the downtown area with a lot of transfer opportunities, and the CMAX along Cleveland Avenue, which is our light BRT that we have in the region that operates along High Street in downtown. So really, we're looking at, we want to look at the most fastest to implement, most federally competitive, and most supportive of existing and future land uses. So as Justin said, we had these initial 3 different options that we looked at, 2 of them primarily in the Arena District, one similar to what the Line 3 and Line 8 currently operate, and then one connection down to Sauder. Really out of the public process and our stakeholder engagement, a new alignment for option 4, most direct to downtown, also could be fastest to implement, as well as supporting that existing and future land use. So on the map here, you see the east-west corridor, as Justin mentioned, is a kind of parallel project going on right now. We actually had a public meeting last night to talk about some of those elements for the east-west corridor. So the east-west corridor on the east side, between East Main Street and East Broad Street, determine what is most feasible to be directly tied into West Broad Street. If it is East Main Street, then there'll have to be a connection downtown, either on 3rd and 4th or High Street. So we wanted to take that in consideration for the Northwest Corridor, which really solidified this alignment. So right now, kind of bending around the existing Twin Rivers, but also looking at that interchange and seeing if there could be potential modifications for transit vehicles to kind of punch through that to make it more direct than what it is currently today. Other things we looked at were the right-of-way and existing lane configurations. Along Spring and Long Street currently, there is a lot of space that can be utilized for that transit dedication. And then we really wanted to look at, make sure that we're not, duplicating what the East-West corridor and the Northwest corridor. So really looking at this at a holistic approach. With the East-West corridor, it'll go through Franklinton, parts of the Scioto Peninsula, and then connecting downtown to the east side. And then the Northwest corridor, obviously Grandview Yard and Grandview Heights, USPS site, and then all the development happening at Astor Park, which is the Crew Stadium, and then also touching the Arena District. Also cover my meds in between both of those with that new campus there. And then we highlight here Columbus Parks and Rec are constructing a new trail bridge across the Scioto River that will solidify that connection and make it even easier.
Thanks, Zach. I think we have one more person just joining us right now. That recommended alignment will be presented in more detail, of course, in the summary report and overview of all the technical evaluation and more info on the public engagement. As well as, in addition to the summary report, we'll be publishing all of the very detailed technical memorandum that provide all of the evaluation results and analysis of quantitative metrics. All of that will be coming online soon. Another important element of this summary report for phase one are recommendations around active transportation connections into the recommended BRT alignment, because obviously most transit users are either pedestrians or maybe using a bicycle or some other personal mobility device. So really enhancing those interconnections between these modes is going to be critical to the success of the corridor. So this includes a recommended connectivity plan. There are a lot of lines on this map. The idea is over time to build out a very comprehensive, low stress pedestrian and bicycle network, filling in gaps in existing sidewalks, emphasis on separated shared use paths as much as possible, whether that's directly along the BRT alignment or on the east-west connections that feed into the corridor, as well as specific spot improvements, these purple dots where we have a number of barriers, whether it's bridge crossings of the Olentangy River or the Scioto River, as Zach mentioned, on the south side, or 315 itself, or even Olentangy River Road or the CSX Railroad. So this is a lot of different potential projects. Part of the next phase of work will be refining priority connections based on refined transit station locations. The summary document also includes a series of transit supportive and transit oriented development principles. One of the other key ingredients of success here is building a really transit supportive development environment, providing that compact, walkable development pattern so that people who are living in the corridor or working in the corridor actually are in close proximity to transit stations. And there are a number of development opportunities throughout this corridor. And those really need to be leveraged in conjunction with implementing a BRT to make sure that we're actually providing that alternative mode of transportation to alleviate some of the congestion and traffic concerns with new denser development, but also providing that denser development that's actually going to create the ridership that's needed for the successful transit corridor. So there are a long series of transit supportive design guidelines appearing in this document that you'll be able to see in much more detail when you have documented in hand, as well as some illustrative development concepts at some potential opportunity sites at different locations along the corridor. There's an example here in the Ohio Health headquarters campus area, already some recent development happening there that's happened over the past few years. A great development opportunity at that location, and there are others featured, the Lenox Town Center area, the Bethel Olentangy Plaza Shopping Center, and other locations up and down the corridor. Again, I want to emphasize what's on the slide here. These are all very illustrative. They're not specific proposed development plans. Development will emerge through partnership with private property owners and based on zoning regulations that are in place at the time the development happens. But this is painting a picture of how we can integrate development patterns with the transit and other mobility investments in the corridor. So that brings us to next steps. The action plan, there's a long matrix of next step recommendations in this document. Some of the key ones that we're highlighting here is taking this plan and advancing it into the next phase of implementation. So getting the BRT project into a design phase and advancing it into the Federal Transit Administration's project development pipeline for a capital investment grant. And as I mentioned earlier, then as we're refining station locations, that will help us to prioritize those key first mile, last mile connections, multimodal connections into station locations. Advancing the development intent, the development principles, and coordinating on the City of Columbus side, coordinating with our zoning code update, which the Department of Development and Building and Zoning Services is in the first phase of right now. So making sure that as that update happens, we're building in those right development guidelines into actual zoning regulations to create that transit supported development environment. And that will include public-private partnerships with specific development opportunities as they emerge. Also studying the long-term build-out connection of the overall corridor. As I noted earlier, prior studies at a high level have looked at a connection ultimately to Dublin. That goes back to CODA's Next Gen plan, to corridor concepts, which really is the precursor to this effort. So further analyzing the alignment alternatives and potential station locations along the entire alignment and what phased implementation might look like over time. And then ultimately coordinating further with the East-West corridor, both from a design perspective and in particular how the two corridors intersect in downtown Columbus, but then also from a funding perspective, so that we're taking a holistic approach to advancing both of these corridors, as well as setting the stage for other corridors as part of that larger system of corridors envisioned by the LinkUS program. So where we're headed right now, I want to emphasize we're still at the early stages here. Really, we're considering this pre-planning in some ways. We're wrapping this up right now in this phase one, and we're moving very quickly into phase two, which includes, as I mentioned, moving into the formal project development process with the Federal Transit Administration, and taking this planning, this conceptual alignment, conceptual station locations, and advancing that into preliminary engineering, actually refining it into feasible design, including transit guideway design, and design of station locations and other infrastructure improvements in the corridor. And we're moving very quickly, immediately into this next design phase right now. As we wrap up this final report for this phase, we're initiating a new contract in partnership with CODA and the city to advance into the preliminary engineering stage, and that will kick off in July, coming up here soon. And I want to emphasize there will be, of course, continued opportunities for stakeholder and public engagement. All of you who have been engaged throughout this process, we're looking forward to continuing to engage you. Again, we're looking forward to having in-person meetings at some point here as we get into the details of what this really will look like. And how it will impact and bring benefits to different sections of the corridor, and working with community members and other stakeholders to really develop the most effective design and outcome for both the development potential and the right-of-way improvements in the corridor. So the last thing that we want to share with you here, featured in our summary report, are some illustrations of what BRT in the Northwest Corridor could look like. Again, these are conceptual, to be analyzed in much more detail in the design phase that we're about to enter, but to give a flavor of what dedicated transit guideway in different configurations, whether that's center running BRT, or perhaps side running, but in that dedicated space and integrated with enhanced pedestrian and bicycle connections, whether those are on street or off street. A critical thing about this corridor, in fact, any of the corridors that will get advanced through this program, is the context changes pretty greatly as you move through the corridor today, and it will always be different at different sections along the way, especially as new development opportunities happen. So the right-of-way design will need to respond to those changes in context as well. So we're developing a series of different options. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all design necessarily. Again, all of these to be explored in much more detail as we move forward into the next phase of work. With that, as I mentioned, we have a fairly short presentation today. We're happy to answer any questions, have some discussion about the recommendations as they're presented here, what to expect in terms of the final reporting here and next steps. So we don't have too many people on this call. We do have one this evening as well. So invite anyone you can either raise your hand via Zoom or just go ahead and unmute and we can have a discussion.
So Justin, when will we expect the report to be on the LinkUS website?
Yeah, we're finalizing it over the next week. So we'll expect it to be up. It may be up as early as next Friday or the first week of June, right after the Memorial Day holiday. And as soon as it's up, we'll send out a notice to everyone on this call and who's signed up on the website for updates. Any other questions?
Justin, this is Rebecca Deeds. I just have a quick comment. I think once you're able to share possible, like the images that you just shared as far as how the layout of the different lanes and the intersection design concepts, I think once this is shared with the community, it will really help them understand what you're talking about. I think because the city doesn't have like the dedicated right-of-way right now for BRT, it's just really hard for people to envision.
Yeah.
But I know that for me to see the multi-use paths and all of this, it's very exciting and it's much more easy to see how this might work for our city. We had so many residents who were so excited about light rail. And so I think they kind of were not initially excited about BRT, but I think as you continue to share more details, you're gonna build buy-in. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that, Rebecca. And we agree. And that's why we have illustrations such as this. Really the intent is that through infrastructure design and operations that we can achieve a lot of what light rail would do, but for a fraction of the cost.
Justin, we do have a comment that's come through, a question, and the question is, will BRT require 5G? And if so, what does this mean for the tree canopy along the corridor lines?
There is a section of our summary report that does deal with emerging technology and innovation. 5G likely would be integrated into vehicle communications through infrastructure to vehicle communications. One of the things that we expect here is transit signal priority and preemption to move the vehicles quickly through the corridor and minimize the overall impacts on traffic flow. So that interconnectivity will be important in terms of the impact of specific 5G facilities on things like tree canopy. Those are certainly details that will need to be looked at closely as this goes from concept to design and actually locating facilities within the right of way and looking at all of those constraints and impacts. Zach, anything that you would add on 5G?
No, you covered it. Looks like Bob has a question or his hand raised.
Yeah, I had a dental appointment that ran longer than I was expecting, and I'm now here and I have a conflict this evening. Is there like a video or something I can watch to kind of see what was presented before I arrived?
We are recording this
Mhm.
and we'll be posting this online. So yeah, as soon as it's available, we'll send
Okay.
this out. So if you've missed, and I know a couple of other folks came in a little bit late, so we'll share that with you.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah,
Thanks for
Brian.
thanks. Hey, thanks for the presentation. These graphics are really beautiful. So I was in the East-West corridor presentation yesterday, and Zach was there, and possibly some others. We talked about, I guess I have a kind of a two-parter I'm interested in your general take on. We talked about median versus curbside entry for these buses, and they talked about how which this was very counterintuitive to me, that the median is actually safer for passengers.
It
And
could be. Yeah.
okay, yeah, and so that's my first question, because that's very counterintuitive for me when you think about people trying to run across a couple of busy lanes to try to catch a bus that they might be late for. Curbside doesn't force people to do that. So that's my first question. And then so maybe you could walk me through why that could be safer. And then the second question I have is, how much, realistically, if you could like ballpark it, how much of this corridor do you think could be dedicated public right of way for BRT?
Dedicated transit guideway.
Yeah, versus like mixed traffic sort of BRT.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's one, again, I hate to keep saying that'll get confirmed in the next phase, but that is the case. We have a general goal of as much dedicated transit guideway as possible, as is feasible, and based on cost benefit analysis as well. We should not assume absolute 100% dedicated guideway, but certainly, I would say more than 50%. You look at most BRT, true BRT projects around the country that do have dedicated guideway. They essentially all have some elements of mixed traffic at pinch point locations where it just hasn't been feasible. But the goal is as much as possible. So that will get determined in the design phase that we're moving into next. In terms of your other question, Brian, with regard to pedestrians crossing and safety with median guideway, again, I'll just kind of flip back and forth. So here's a option for curbside, and then different configurations of this would be center running, median, curbside with median dividers, few different operationally, a few different scenarios of how that guideway could fit in the corridor. One of the considerations around a center running guideway is you're introducing a barrier between opposing lanes of traffic. And that can have a traffic calming effect for regular vehicular traffic. You're also providing, I'll go back to one of these, you're providing a shorter pedestrian crossing distance to the station. And if you think about somebody who may need to, depending on what direction you're going when you're trying to access the BRT, you may have to cross the entire roadway, depending on what side of the roadway you're starting on from your original destination. So the center running does have the potential to provide a pedestrian refuge, and then to be coordinated with, those would essentially always happen at a signalized location, adding things like a pedestrian lead interval to prioritize the safety of pedestrians getting to the station location and not having to run, actually. So understand that maybe the potential for that to be counterintuitive, but there are some benefits. And again, that'll all be explored in the next design phase. But again, it's not guaranteed as center running. And per my point earlier, the context and the right of way configuration will change. We may see multiple versions of these different options at different points along the corridor.
Yeah, additionally, there's a lot of, the way the makeup of the corridor is there's a lot of areas where there's development on one side of the street, so center running might not make the most sense on those specific areas. But yeah.
Thanks. And a quick follow-up on that. Sorry, I appreciate that explanation. I think, I don't know what the statistical analysis would say about, requiring half the people to cross the entire street versus requiring everybody to cross like half the street, in terms of safety. I don't know what the trade-offs are there, but I'm interested too in, like, within the project team, have you developed sort of a matrix or a sort of decision chart for when there's not enough public right of way for everything that you want to do? What gets thrown out first?
Yeah.
So for instance, I mean, when I look at this thing you have up right now, it's like there is just simply not going to be enough room in most of this, in a lot of this corridor, for both a shared use path that's protected and off the street, and the dedicated, BRT lanes and traffic lanes. So, and obviously, Justin, because you're an expert on active transportation, that when we have gaps in the biking network, that like any gap in the biking network, where you're throwing sharrows on the road, means that fewer people are biking. So, when it comes down to, are we throwing buses in mixed traffic, or are we throwing bikes in mixed traffic? Or are we allowing bikes to use the BRT lanes? Like those kinds of questions. I'm curious how you're thinking about those conflicts.
Yeah, in fact, it's maybe a little hard to see, but one of these options does even include, in some locations, you could provide essentially a wider BRT lane that could integrate dedicated bicycle space with minimal mixing at those station locations where everything's moving really slowly at a signalized location. So lots of different ways that could play out. But Brian, you're absolutely right. A lot of what will have to be dealt with through the design process is exploring the trade-offs based on right-of-way constraints, cost impacts, traffic impacts, and there's actually, we didn't include it in this slide deck, but in the summary report, there's a matrix. I think you used that term. There is a matrix of design considerations and priorities in different contexts, whether it's along the primary BRT route, where we want to prioritize transit movement and prioritize pedestrian and bicycle access to transit, and then other things like, say, parking. We don't have on-street parking on Olentangy River Road today, but maybe some of the east-west connections with new development could be, that might be more of a priority on one of the connecting streets, but not so much on the transit priority corridor. So there's sort of a high-level prioritization that we're laying out as guidelines here, and then that will have to feed into a much more detailed trade-offs analysis through design feasibility. Matt, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It took me a few minutes to figure out where to raise my hand, so I think one of my questions was asked already. I do have kind of two separate questions, but I really appreciate the presentation, and these graphics are fantastic. They're very helpful. In thinking of kind of the long range game here, this is a very urban example right here, right?
Yep.
The entire corridor is urbanized like that today. It may, however, make progress by time the BRT line is installed. But I think that transition between like what it is today and what it will be in the future, so that first mile, last mile connection, people may be accessing it from further out or for different ways today versus when it's eventually built. So that's kind of one question, is the consideration of that and how that evolves over time. And then my other consideration is, I look towards the partnering potential of like a common credential here supporting using the BRT line, if that is just part of your journey, right? And if there's any thoughts in this study, and maybe it's not within that scope, but kind of like a common credential or a benefit if you use this and partner it with some other form of transportation to complete your journey. I'm not sure if that's in that scope. So I know those are kind of two different But those are the questions that I have at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. So Zach, you might want to jump in on the latter. On the first item, you're absolutely right. The existing development conditions through much of this corridor, frankly, aren't where they need to be the most transit supportive environment, which is why this emphasized so much in this phase of work, and will be in the next phase as well. Should also note that, a design concept like this that's showing, that dense compact development, that's going to be most feasible and most effective at actual station locations, not necessarily, we shouldn't expect the entire 7 miles of linear corridor to be that same density of development, but where is it most of strategic benefit? Where those development opportunities are, those help to inform where station locations make the most sense, and sometimes vice versa. In terms of, you use the phrase common credential, I think another way of thinking about that is commuter benefit program, perhaps. Actually, the action plan matrix that we showed does include a recommendation to explore opportunities around programs like that to provide incentives for people to use the system. And that could happen in a variety of ways. Obviously there's the CPAS program as a model in downtown Columbus, which has been really successful. There could be specific public-private partnerships with specific developments for employees or residents at different locations along the corridor as part of an overall transportation demand management approach to try to minimize the need for more parking, which can have a development benefit impact and actually provide more space for more affordable housing, among other things, as long as people then have that reliable alternative to having the car, right? So those are definitely the types of things that we want to look to integrating into an implementation program. Zach, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. But yeah, the concepts to explore would be, new apartments, and seeing if instead of having 2 cars per unit or 1 car per unit, you get a transit pass instead to kind of help transition that mode shift into more different modes. Could be a option explored, along the corridor as well.
The other item sort of related to one of your questions, Matt, is as we move into a design phase, CODA will be looking at the potential need for adjustments to the existing bus service, the lines that do either run through or connect into the corridor, kind of the overall transit network and system operations for the other lines that need to feed into the system, providing those, even longer than a last mile connection. And then are there things like, CODA's work in the, sorry, Zach, I'm blanking on the shuttle program name right now.
CODA Plus?
CODA Plus, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, if you're not familiar with CODA Plus, it's a concept where we have a couple different zones throughout the region where, similar to Uber and Lyft, you have an app and you can take that from your house if you're within the zone to a stop at no cost. So kind of exploring those concepts because, when you look at the corridor, not many people are living directly on the corridor. So that's why it's very important to focus on those pedestrian connections, bike connections, and other transit connections to see how people feed into specifically the BRT that would operate along Tangier River Road.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate the thought into there. When people do come back, in full in person, if we get to that point, we're going to go back to the same constraints we had. And I'm talking specifically at Ohio State, but just the congestion, right? And any way that we can incentivize and help that, because if you can't fit all the vehicles there, then it's a dissatisfier for all of those customers. So I think looking at those partnering potentials, those commuter benefits, that's probably the better term for it. Justin, you're right. I think that's perfect. So thank you for addressing that.
Great, thank you. Brian, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on little bit of the, well, I guess I'll just say this is a question about equity. And based on what you were just talking about, I think a lot of the programming that you were just talking about, maybe this question is a little bit more for Zach because it's CODA. To me, that fuels inequity because it gives people with professional jobs access to these services for free, basically, while people who don't have those kinds of professional jobs that won't participate in a CPAS type program don't get that access to it, and they just have to pay for it at the point of service. And so I mean, personally for me, I would long-term like to see CODA be entirely free for users at the point of sale with a slight raise to taxes countywide. And I think when you look at CODA's budget, which I have, the fare collection is a fairly small part of CODA's budget, which to me means that it could be replaced pretty easily. So all of this technology you're talking about assumes a fare, right? And I'm curious why, as a city, and when we're trying to think about equity, why we're not moving toward a fair, a non-fair system, essentially a system where it is free at the point of sale, at the point of boarding for everybody. So that's my question.
Yeah, it's been a hot topic I think in the transit world in the past couple of years. Obviously pros and cons. So currently the fares make up about 11 or 12% of our revenue. So not a very high amount. But if that revenue source is disappeared, then there's an offset there that has to come from somewhere else. So, when you look at it at other agencies, does that mean a cut in service? Does that mean less service? But on the kind of the CPAS argument of more the professionals having passes, I'm not necessarily up to date with things that we're exploring, but I think we are exploring low-income people that are associated with various nonprofits throughout the region and looking at different pass programs that could be provided to them. So that's one thing we're exploring, but really, yeah, this is more of I guess not just specific to the Northwest Corridor problem or a question. It's really the system as a whole. So thanks for bringing that up. It's kind of worth mentioning that because of the fares make up such a low portion of our revenue. When we had no fare during COVID, it didn't have as much of an impact on CODA as it did in other cities like the New Yorks and the LAs that their fares can make up 50% of their revenue. So definitely an interesting dynamic when you kind of look at that and how we use that revenue. But yeah, that kind of answers your question. I know it's not really an answer, but something that CODA is looking to make sure our fares are equitable to everybody.
It does make sense. But I mean, when you have the city, county, and CODA at the table, $12 million is like a rounding error, quite frankly. And so I would love to see more movement and energy toward that. I think that's a problem that we can solve. And I don't see why we need to go out and pay a bunch of money for various forms of technology or like kiosks at all of these things to allow you to buy a pass when we could very easily spend that money on just not charging people to get on the bus, which would be an immediate sort of move toward complete equity in the system. So, I mean, again, to me, that's just a very simple solution, and I'm not sure why there isn't more energy for it at the top of the system, but that's just me.
Well, Brian, I think we all appreciate you bringing that to the table, and certainly it's been a point of conversation over the past couple of years. I've had a number of conversations about that, and it's being piloted or fully modeled in some other locations as well. One thing I'll note is, as part of moving through the implementation process, the design process, there's very detailed financial planning, of course, that has to happen as you move through the Federal Transit Administration's process. it's more than just the capital infrastructure costs, which, you know, we know will be substantial, and we'll get a much better handle on those for the Northwest corridor as we move into the next phase. And, you know, that's happening with the East-West now as well, but also long-term operations and maintenance of the capital and the service. So fares, you know, and fare structure in the future would be one of those line items that gets analyzed in, and presumably different scenarios around that. So we will certainly, you know, take this feedback, you know, back to the LinkUS partners as we move forward into the implementation stages.
Thank you for that. And we do have another question. I do want to also just underscore that you mentioned equity. That is part of the work that we are really focused on throughout these processes and throughout the planning, not only as it relates to fares, but as we look at housing and as we look at workforce and look at all of those pieces, it is a driving factor in planning. So I just wanted to, I know you all know that, I just wanted to put that as a reminder. We do have another question, and it's related to the graphic that's online. It's a comment and a question. The graphic, it's very busy. It looks a little scary to this person. There are 9 lanes of impervious surface. So here's the question. How do we address the urban heat island issue in Columbus as we look at all of the pieces and parts of our graphic and the work that we're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and kind of dovetails with some of the early feedback that I noted at the top of the presentation in terms of making sure that sustainability stays at the forefront as well. It's going to be really important as we get into those design details. You know, these graphics do show street trees, for instance, or potentially even in medians. So actual green space, opportunities for green infrastructure, you know, stormwater management integrated into the right-of-way design to mitigate impervious surface, as well as, of course, as I mentioned, electrification of the fleet. So we, you know, would have zero emissions as well from the transit service in the corridor. Opportunities for stations to integrate solar or other alternative energy potentially. All of those types of things would get explored in the design phase as well, and are all really critical. And of course, you know, being in such close proximity to the Olentangy River, you know, where Olentangy River Road is very close to the river, we'll have to look very closely at minimizing, mitigating, avoiding environmental impacts, and potentially even opportunities to enhance conditions that could be improved in proximity to the river. So those are all important considerations. The last one that I'll note is, this gets back to, I think it was Brian noted earlier, you know, the limited, number of constraints, limited right-of-way. There may not be the feasible opportunity to widen to provide a dedicated transit guideway. There may be areas where we're actually looking at repurposing existing right-of-way, existing lanes. So rather than adding additional impervious surface, making more sustainable use of the impervious surface that we have today.
Are there any other questions? I think not, yes.
Yeah, so if not, well, thank you. We appreciate your continued engagement. Oh, I do see Brian. Is that a fresh hand up, Brian?
Just one more short comment on equity that I wanted to add. And sorry, I know I've done a lot of talking, but
no worries.
So, you know, one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of equity with this that I would love for the team to think more about as well, not to say you're not thinking about it, but I'm just offering it, is that, you know, experts are pointing out in major cities, and Columbus is no exception, that there's a general trend toward the suburbanization of poverty. And so as we think about these corridors, It isn't simply that we're looking to attract commuters to these lines, but as poverty becomes more and more suburbanized, and as the internal parts of the city continue to gentrify, that creates displacement, and folks out in the suburbs are going to become, there's just going to be more poverty out in the suburbs, which means people are going to need to get to jobs and to essential services. And so if we're thinking about how to get commuters, like professional commuters, onto these lines, and how to incentivize them and how to lower their costs, then we also should be doing that, I think, even more so with folks who will be lower income and living in the suburbs in poverty. So that's just another angle on the equity issue that I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to emphasize that by no means is this effort, either for the Northwest Corridor or the LinkUS initiative overall, solely focused on professional commuters. This corridor does have a number of professional commuters, but there's a wide diversity of workers across multiple sectors that access this corridor today and that will be in the future. So we agree with you, Brian, absolutely. Bob?
Yeah, I have a question about picture number 5, which is not currently being displayed. It took me a while to figure out that lane marked only bus, where the bus is going in 2 different directions, because the buses look alike from front and back, so I couldn't quite figure out what was front and what was front and back. My question is, blind bus riders, how would a blind bus rider know that they have to cross the street halfway, make a left turn, and then walk down what I'm assuming is a raised traffic island to reach the bus stop?
Well, of course, at any crossing location, a roadway or transit guideway as part of the roadway would be physical detection and audible warning and all of those things that we build into signalized locations for the blind and others with accessibility issues. Zach, I'm not sure if you have anything.
No, that's
more
an interesting
specific
point.
to
Yeah, we haven't really heard that before. I'm curious to how some of our peer cities have done or considered that in their design. So that's a great point. I know. So currently, generally our stops are square-like, so they're different than what the city's signs are. So that's one kind of element that we differentiate where a stop is. But yeah, that's something that I'd be curious to see how our peers in Indianapolis and Cleveland dealt with that.
I want to mention a different situation, which is not on this map, but something I see. I think on Summit Street, a blind bus rider would have to step down into a bicycle lane and then step up onto a raised traffic island to catch the southbound Summit Street bus. That's not on the map, but it's an equivalent situation.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I appreciate you bringing it up. I'm not aware of particular issues that have arisen with regard to that, not to say that there haven't been. So I'm happy to bring that back to our consulting team and make sure that we're keeping that at the forefront as we get into design considerations. That brings us.
Yeah, in addition to that, yeah. I do want to add. So yeah, we do have some visually impaired groups that have come to our CODA's public meetings before. So perhaps that's a group that we need to get in touch with to see how some of these elements could be altered to make sure that they can use it. So thanks for that comment.
Yeah. Is that group that meets quarterly at 33 North High but doesn't meet right now?
I'm not sure. I'll look into that though.
Yeah.
And that fits right into Gail's earlier point about equity as a priority, and certainly equitable engagement. And we've all been limited by our engagement opportunities over the past year. But as we get into design, we need to engage those specific populations that have specific needs to make sure we're building that into the design. And we're going to prioritize that for sure. Again, we're right at 1. Want to be respectful of your time. Appreciate the questions and the discussion here this afternoon. If you know others that are interested, haven't signed up yet, there's an opportunity at 6 o'clock today. As we said earlier, we're recording this. We'll have that up online soon, and we'll be sending out an email update once we do. And again, when our final report is ready and published on the website at linkuscolumbus.com within the next week or so, we'll send out a notice of that as well, and look for further correspondence from us as we move into the summer and kick off the next phase of work. Thanks, everyone.